I wasn't expecting to see him again. Certainly not like this. Standing in the doorway of our house, suitcase in hand, as if this had always been his home. He didn't call ahead, didn't send a message. He simply appeared. Calm, confident, the kind of presence that fills a room without trying. It took me a moment to recognize him fully. Broader shoulders, a bit of stubble along his jaw, eyes steady but softer somehow. Older but still carrying that trace of the boy I remembered. My husband was the first to move. He laughed, loud and easy, stepping forward to pull his son into a firm embrace. They clapped each other's backs, the way men do when words aren't enough. I stayed by the kitchen counter, my hands damp from washing fruit, the hem of my robe brushing against my knees. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. Shake his hand? Smile politely? But he closed the space between us before I had the chance to decide, leaning in to hug me as if it was the most natural thing in the world. The touch was brief, innocent, on the surface. But through the thin fabric of my robe, I felt the heat of his skin, and it startled me. Not the gesture itself, but the quiet ripple it stirred somewhere beneath my ribs, a sensation I hadn't felt in longer than I cared to admit. He said he was back because of work, changing jobs, he explained. Needed some time to figure things out, would stay here with us for a while. Perfectly reasonable, perfectly benign. My husband was pleased, glad to have his son nearby again. They moved easily into conversation, catching up on life, plans, opportunities. But I couldn't stop noticing how, when my husband turned to pour coffee, the boy, no, not a boy anymore, kept his eyes on me just a moment too long. It was the kind of look that lingers quietly, almost politely, but plants itself under your skin. Not bold enough to name, not weak enough to ignore. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. I told myself it was habit. But as I stood in front of the wardrobe, fingers grazing over hangers, I caught myself hesitating longer than necessary. I passed over the soft sweaters, the loose blouses, chose instead a fitted top, the one that hugged my waist just enough to remind me of the shape beneath the fabric. I chose earrings, too. Small, delicate. A detail no one else would care about. No one but me. In the kitchen, he was already there. Early sunlight slipped through the windows, tracing the outline of his shoulders as he leaned against the counter, barefoot, in a plain gray sweatshirt. His hair was still damp from the shower, and the slight scruff along his jaw caught the light. He was stirring sugar into his coffee. Slow, absent-minded. "Didn't expect to see you up this early," he said without looking at me. I kept my voice steady. Could say the same to you. Our words were light, but between them sat the weight of that first long glance. The one from the night before. The one I pretended not to feel. The house settled into its rhythms over the next few days. My husband buried himself in work, late nights on conference calls, early mornings out the door. And his son. He fit back into the spaces of the house as if he'd never left. Helping in the garden, repairing the loose hinge on the back gate, making coffee and sharing easy jokes with his father. There was nothing out of place. Nothing anyone would question. But I felt it. The quiet tension beneath the surface. The way my eyes followed him when he moved. The way he seemed to sense it without ever saying a word. And one morning, as I stood at the stove stirring eggs, I felt the air shift behind me. I didn't have to turn to know it was him. His footsteps were light, careful. Close enough to feel the warmth of his body near mine, though he never touched me. He reached past my shoulder for a cup from the shelf, and I held my breath without meaning to. "Smells good," he murmured, voice low. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. It wasn't a moment anyone else would have noticed. But my skin knew it. Every inch of me knew it. I told myself it was harmless. Just proximity. Just attention after so much absence. But somewhere, deep in the part of me I didn't let out into the light, I already knew that it wasn't the last time I would wait for him to enter a room. The days began to fold into each other with an ease that should have made me comfortable. It was strange how quickly the house adjusted to his presence again, how smoothly he fit into the everyday, as though he had always been here. My husband's schedule remained as chaotic as ever. Business dinners, phone calls at odd hours, polite smiles exchanged across the breakfast table before he disappeared into another day. But the house felt fuller now, louder even in its quiet. His son moved through the rooms like someone who belonged, casually leaning against door frames, sharing meals without ceremony, offering to help with anything that needed doing. He laughed easily, made space for my husband's stories, nodded at the right moments. On the surface, nothing was out of place. And yet, I caught myself watching him more than I should have. Noticing the curve of his forearms when he worked in the garden, the way he rolled up his sleeves without thought, the moments he pushed his hair back from his face when the sweat clung to his temples. All these things I told myself were just the natural observations of someone sharing a home. Harmless. But I felt the weight of my own gaze. It was late afternoon when the opportunity first presented itself. Not planned, not even intentional, not really. My husband had called to say he would be working late again. Some last-minute meeting, some client who needed extra attention. His absence no longer surprised me. I didn't even pretend to be disappointed. The words barely registered. The man, suggested we head into town. There was talk of fixing up the old terrace in the backyard, maybe planting something new. He offered to drive, casually, a suggestion tossed out between mouthfuls of lunch. We could go look at materials, he said, and I nodded before I thought too much about it. The ride into town was uneventful, safe. The music on the radio hummed softly beneath the sound of the road. We spoke about neutral things, the weather, the state of the fence, small repairs that might need attention. His voice was light, steady, and I told myself that I was imagining the quiet electricity beneath it. We parked outside the store just as the sky began to change, a dull stretch of gray clouds pulling over the late afternoon sun. Inside, we walked aisles of supplies, nails, wood stain, heavy bags of soil, speaking easily, politely. But I felt my chest tighten every time our arms brushed accidentally, every time he leaned a little too close to point something out on a label. It wasn't until the drive home that the air between us shifted. The rain came down quickly, sudden and hard, drumming against the windshield as we pulled into the small parking lot of a grocery store. Neither of us moved to get out. The rain was too thick. The wipers kept time with my heartbeat, steady, rhythmic, louder than I wanted it to be. He reached forward to turn the volume of the radio down, then leaned back in his seat. For a while, neither of us spoke. I felt him looking at me before I turned my head. And when I did, he didn't look away. It was such a small space between us. The center console, the quiet, the weight of the moment pressing in from all sides. His eyes held mine, steady, certain, but asking, not taking, waiting. There was no rush, no sudden movement. Just the slow, deliberate lean forward. The soft brush of his lips against mine, a question more than a demand. I could have pulled away. I should have. But instead, I closed the space. The kiss was gentle, careful. A soft collision that felt more like discovery than possession. There was nothing hurried in the way his hand moved to my face, fingers grazing my jaw as though he was afraid I might disappear if he touched me too hard. And when we pulled back, we didn't speak. We stayed there, inches apart, breathing the same tight air, listening to the rain fill the silence between us. I should have been angry. I should have been ashamed. But there was only the unbearable awareness of how long it had been since someone had touched me with that kind of attention. With care, with patience, with hunger held barely beneath the surface. I stared at my hands in my lap, fingers clenched too tightly together, my breath caught somewhere between my throat and my chest. He didn't apologize. Didn't explain. He just looked at me, calmly, steadily, and I looked back. We drove home in silence. The rain softened. The world outside remained unchanged. but I knew nothing inside me would ever feel quite the same. The morning after the kiss felt too ordinary. The sky was clear, the sun sharp against the windows, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen like any other day. But my body betrayed me. I woke earlier than usual, restless, my mind still trapped inside that car, in the quiet space where his lips had found mine so gently, so deliberately. I half expected him to avoid me, half feared it. But when I walked outside, crossing the narrow stone path toward the garden, I saw him there. Calm, focused, bending over the small flower beds, hands deep in the soil, sleeves rolled up past his elbows. There was not a hint of tension in his face, not a shadow of last night's mistake, if it could even be called that. He straightened up when he noticed me, offered a nod, a soft, "Good morning." His voice even, polite. I answered back, equally measured. Smiled the same way I always did. But my throat was tight. My fingers clenched in the fabric of my robe where he couldn't see. I stood there longer than necessary, watching him adjust the position of a young plant, noticing the way his forearms tensed when he pressed down the earth, noticing everything. It would have been easier if he'd looked away, if he had given me some sign of discomfort. But he didn't. He kept himself perfectly steady, the image of casual grace, as if nothing between us had changed. And maybe that was the most dangerous part of all. How easily we both slid into this act, this performance of indifference. While beneath the surface, my heart raced every time I caught his eyes glancing up from under those lashes. I wanted him to look again. I waited for it. Every shift of his weight, every moment he leaned forward, I felt my breath catch, my body waiting. But he didn't give me the satisfaction. He played his role so well that I almost questioned my memory of the night before. Almost. Later that afternoon, it was his idea to host a dinner. Casual, he said. A little something for the neighbors, a few of my husband's colleagues. "I'll cook," he offered, flashing that same easy smile that seemed to disarm everyone around him. "It's been too quiet here lately." My husband was delighted. Praised his son's thoughtfulness, his ability to bring people together. He didn't see the slight pause in my chest, the quick flutter that rose at the thought of spending an evening watching him move through the kitchen, hearing his laugh fill the spaces between conversations. I nodded along, agreed to help with the arrangements, all the while feeling the familiar ache curling low in my stomach. The evening came too quickly. I dressed with a care I told myself was appropriate for company. A dark, simple dress that grazed the line between modesty and allure. Silk beneath the cotton, lace hidden where only I would know. I told myself it was silly, meaningless, but my hands lingered too long at the clasp of my necklace, adjusting, perfecting. The house glowed under soft lights. Music drifted from the speakers in the living room, something gentle, unintrusive. Guests filled the space with laughter and easy conversation, the hum of voices blending into a comfortable background. And at the center of it all, there he was, moving effortlessly between the stove and the counter, offering drinks, plating dishes, joking with the neighbors as though he had never been gone. I watched him laugh at my husband's stories, watched the way he poured wine for the guests, listened to the quiet charm that seemed to win everyone over without effort. But every so often, between gestures, between glances, his eyes found me. Briefly, softly. And every time they did, my skin responded like a live wire. I told myself it was nothing. Just looks. Just the aftermath of a moment we had both regretted. But my body didn't believe me. It leaned into the space between those glances, leaned into the air, thickening every time he drifted a little too close. Dinner moved along easily. Plates passed, glasses filled, voices raised in laughter. And then, as if by chance, as if it were nothing at all, his fingers brushed mine beneath the table. It was nothing more than the simple passing of a dish, a plate of roasted vegetables, a casual handoff. But his fingers lingered. Just long enough. Pressed lightly against mine, a second longer than needed. a touch so brief it could have been missed by anyone else. But not by me. My breath caught. I felt the heat rush to my cheeks, my pulse quicken. I told myself to pull away, but I stayed still, frozen in the softness of that impossible contact. Across the table, my husband was telling a story, laughing, eyes fixed on the neighbor seated beside him. Oblivious. No one noticed. No one except me. I gripped the edge of my chair beneath the tablecloth, knuckles whitening, heart racing. The voice inside my head tried to reason with me, to write it off as a game, a harmless flirtation, an accident even. But my body knew better. My body had already chosen its side. After the guests left, after the last glass was rinsed and the last plate dried, I lay awake long after my husband's breathing settled into its steady rhythm beside me. My mind replayed that moment again and again, the softness of his touch, the weight of his gaze across the room, the slow burn of wanting more. I told myself it was nothing. But I chose my lingerie more carefully the next morning, and I knew exactly why. It was my suggestion. I told myself it was practical, helpful, the natural thing to offer. He needed to handle some paperwork for his new job, appointments at the city office that he wasn't familiar with, and my husband, as usual, was too buried under meetings to even consider going along. The decision fell into place easily, my husband almost relieved as he passed the responsibility to me. "Maybe you could go with him," he said casually over breakfast, not looking up from his emails. "You know the process better than I do." I nodded before he finished the sentence, smiled, agreed. It wasn't until I was alone in the shower that the weight of my own eagerness settled somewhere between my ribs. I stood under the water longer than necessary, forehead against the tile, my hands pressed flat against the wall as if that might steady the rush I felt. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just a drive into the city, a favor, a task. But my hands were shaking when I chose what to wear. Not too formal, not too obvious. Dark jeans, the soft blouse that clung a little closer to my body than the others, a thin gold chain resting against my collarbone. Small details. Nothing anyone else would notice. When he appeared at the door, keys in hand, waiting by the car, I felt the pull of something inside me tighten. His hair was still damp, the sleeves of his shirt pushed up just enough to show the strength in his forearms. Casual, effortless. The drive began the way any drive might. Windows cracked open just slightly, the sound of the city bleeding in beneath the music from the radio. Conversation started where it always did. Easy, harmless, about the errands ahead, the frustrating inefficiency of city offices, the weather, the traffic. But somewhere between the first red light and the long stretch of highway, the tone shifted. He asked about the books stacked on my bedside table, the ones I never spoke about at dinner. I told him about them, half laughing, half embarrassed, and he listened. Really listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak. His questions were soft, curious, thoughtful in a way that felt too intimate for such a casual ride. I caught him glancing at me during one of my answers, and when our eyes met, he didn't look away. "You look different when you smile like that," he said finally, voice low enough that I could pretend not to hear. "When it's real." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I felt the heat rise beneath my skin before I saw the flush of color in my cheeks reflected in the side mirror. My fingers curled against my lap, tightening in my skirt. The city passed by outside the window, buildings blurring against the afternoon light. I couldn't stop noticing how gently he held the steering wheel, how steady his hand was on the gear shift, how his arm rested so close to my knee that it was impossible not to feel the proximity between us. At the office, we checked in at the reception desk, only to be told there was a system issue. The appointment delayed. An hour, maybe more. "We could wait here," I offered automatically, already knowing what he would suggest. "Or," he said with a tilt of his head, "we could find somewhere nearby, get something to eat." The cafe he chose was tucked between two narrow buildings, unassuming, half hidden beneath the branches of an overgrown tree outside. Small tables, simple chairs, the kind of place where the menus were handwritten on a chalkboard, and the coffee smelled like it had been brewed slowly, with care. We took a table by the window, the quiet hum of other conversations filling the room but not touching our corner. He ordered a black coffee. I asked for tea. Neither of us really looked at the menu. The conversation fell into softer places. Not small talk. Not exactly. Stories from his last apartment, memories of childhood trips, questions about how I met his father. There was a warmth to the exchange, the kind of honesty that grows between two people who know they are on dangerous ground but choose to ignore the warning signs. At some point, I realized I had been leaning forward, my elbow on the table, chin resting lightly on my hand. His eyes followed the movement when I tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. I saw the way his gaze dropped to the curve of my neck, and for the briefest moment, I let my fingers trail along the line of my throat, felt the air grow heavier between us. Neither of us spoke about what we were doing. I bit my lower lip, half lost in thought, and caught him watching that too. His eyes were darker now, more deliberate. When the bill came, he reached for it before I could, waving away my hand with a soft shake of his head. Outside, the sun had already begun to fall lower, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. We walked back to the car in silence, close enough that our arms nearly brushed, but not quite. It was just as I began to say something, some useless, safe remark about the time, about the wait at the office, that he stopped. His hand found my wrist, fingers firm but not rough, holding me still. I turned toward him, words caught halfway to my mouth. He didn't speak immediately, just held my gaze, steady, intense, eyes locking onto mine with the weight of everything neither of us was saying. Seconds passed, maybe more. "You don't understand," he said finally, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "How much this is driving me crazy." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I didn't move. His hand loosened, but neither of us stepped back. We stood there on the sidewalk, the noise of the city humming around us, and I felt the ground tilt slightly beneath my feet. When he let go, when we walked the final steps back to the car, the space between us felt unbearable. I had never been so aware of wanting someone, or so afraid of how much I already did. It was his idea. Again. He mentioned it over breakfast with the same casual tone he used when offering to fix a broken hinge or carry the groceries inside. "I was thinking about trimming the trees out back," he said, leaning against the kitchen doorway, mug in hand. "They're getting out of control. Figured it could be a good day for it." My husband barely looked up from his phone, distracted by messages and plans. He was getting ready for a weekend away. Golf with friends, late dinners, laughter shared over long drives and business gossip. He smiled faintly, thanked his son for the initiative, and turned to me with that same distracted charm. "Maybe you can keep him company," he suggested. "Or just relax. Don't let him rope you into working." I nodded, smiled. I told myself I hadn't been waiting for this, but the flutter low in my stomach betrayed me. The morning moved slow, deliberate. The sun rose high, warming the stones of the terrace, the green of the garden vibrating beneath its weight. From the kitchen window, I watched him pull on work gloves, tug them tight at the wrists, his arms bare beneath a plain t-shirt. He moved easily, confidently, lifting the ladder, testing the weight of the shears, rolling his shoulders as if the motion belonged to him. And it did. The control, the strength, the unthinking grace of someone who knows his body and trusts it. I found an excuse. "Water," I told myself. Just bringing him something to drink. But I stayed too long at the faucet, filling the glass slowly, watching the arc of the stream as if that might make the excuse more convincing. When I stepped outside, the sun was already pressing against my skin, warm enough to make the air shimmer. My dress was light, soft cotton, the hem brushing above my knees, the breeze tugging gently at the fabric. He looked up when he heard the door, offered a quick smile, eyes squinting against the sun. "You didn't have to." "I know," I answered, setting the glass on the small table near the ladder. but I didn't turn to go. I stayed, arms crossed loosely over my chest, watching as he reached for the shears again, gripping the handles with ease. The rhythm of his work was hypnotic, focused, unhurried. The snap of the blades against the branches, the soft thud of cuttings falling to the ground. Sweat darkened the fabric at his back, tracing down the line of his spine. He worked in silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled, and I stood there, watching, feeling the slow tightening of something inside me. At one point, he paused, wiping his brow with the back of his arm, then turned toward me. The corners of his mouth lifted just slightly. "You want to try?" I laughed, too quick, too nervous, shaking my head. "I'm not exactly dressed for it." His eyes moved down the line of my body, soft and deliberate, pausing at the hem of my dress where the wind had caught it, lifting the edge just enough. His gaze returned to mine, steady. Maybe next time. I should have gone inside then. I knew it. But my feet stayed planted where they were, as if the earth beneath me had chosen to hold me there. He went back to the branches, but I felt the change in the air, felt the way his movements slowed, the way his glance found me more often, longer each time. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't chance. When he finished, he stepped down from the ladder, pulling off his gloves, tossing them onto the table where the water had already gone warm. His breathing was heavier now, the kind of exhaustion that settles in your muscles, not your mind. "Done for today," he said, wiping his hands on the sides of his jeans. I reached for the glass instinctively, offering it to him, my fingers brushing lightly against his as he took it. The same innocent gesture we had played out a dozen times before, but now it held weight, held memory, held the silent echo of that first kiss in the car. He didn't drink. He set the glass down, stepped closer. "You wore that dress on purpose," he said, voice low, rough at the edges. "Didn't you?" I felt my lips part, felt the breath catch between my teeth. I didn't deny it. I didn't need to. He took another step, closing the space between us, but not quite, leaving just enough air, just enough hesitation to let me say no. I didn't. I tilted my chin slightly upward, met his gaze without looking away. His hand came up, slow, deliberate, fingertips grazing the line of my jaw, settling lightly against my cheek. He held there, eyes searching mine, waiting, asking. I didn't move. His lips met mine with the same restraint, the same unbearable gentleness that had filled that first kiss. But this time there was no question, no uncertainty, only the slow, deliberate deepening of a touch that had been waiting far too long. The kiss was soft, steady, patient, the kind of kiss that knows exactly what it's risking, exactly what it's doing. His thumb traced the curve of my cheek as his other hand found the small of my back, not pulling me closer, not yet, just resting there, claiming the space between us. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us spoke. There was no apology, no excuse. Only the weight of breath between us, the thrum of desire too loud now to ignore. He reached up again, tracing the line of my jaw with the back of his fingers, softer this time, more tender than I was prepared for. "I want to see you again," he said quietly, like this. I didn't answer, but my eyes told him everything. I stayed standing there long after he walked away, my body humming, my hands trembling at my sides, my heart refusing to slow. And for the first time, I stopped pretending I wanted it to. It didn't happen all at once. There was no sudden crossing of a line so clear that either of us could point to it and say, "Here. Here is where we lost control." Instead, it was quieter than that. A slow unraveling, a soft erosion of the boundaries we pretended still held. After that second kiss, something between us shifted in a way that neither of us tried to deny. There were no more excuses, no accidental meetings, no blaming circumstance or chance. If we ended up in the same room, it was because one of us had made sure we would be there. It became habit before I could admit it was intention. The kitchen in the early mornings, where he would lean casually against the counter, mug in hand, watching me from beneath lowered lashes as I moved around the room. The garden in the afternoons, where he found reasons to stay longer than necessary, adjusting the placement of stones, tying back branches that didn't really need attention. The garage, where I wandered in under the pretense of looking for something stored away, only to find him already there, waiting without waiting. We stopped needing words for these meetings. Our conversations grew shorter, the spaces between sentences stretching into something heavier, charged. But the silences said enough. His eyes lingered on my hands when they moved, followed the line of my neck when I reached up to fix my hair. And I felt myself leaning into that gaze, leaning into the heat it stirred beneath my skin. I began dressing differently. At first, I didn't notice I was doing it. A softer blouse, the fabric falling closer to my body. The skirt that caught the curve of my hips just enough. A deliberate choice of underwear. Lace, silk, the kind that felt like a secret pressed against my skin. I told myself it was for me. A quiet indulgence. But I only reached for those pieces on the days I knew he would be home. Perfume, too. Subtle. Barely there. But enough. Enough that I noticed the way his eyes followed me a moment longer when I passed by. I caught myself listening for the front door, for the sound of his footsteps across the hardwood. My heart stilled each time, held tight in my chest, waiting. Not for an accident. Not for fate. But for him. I no longer waited for chance. I waited for him. Every day. It was his idea, again, the next time we found ourselves alone. He mentioned the garden, the thought of adding something more to the space. Lights, maybe. Or new planters for the far side of the terrace. We could drive out, take a look at what they have at the nursery, he offered, his tone light, offhanded. My husband, predictably, waved the suggestion away. Too busy. Meetings stacked one after the other, a half apology as he turned back to his laptop, barely lifting his head. You two go. You have better taste for that kind of thing anyway. I agreed before the words had fully left his mouth. The drive was familiar now. The easy rhythm of conversation between us, skimming across safe topics, but always circling something deeper beneath the surface. He asked about my favorite flowers, and I answered. He listened. Really listened. And the spaces between our words grew longer, fuller, weighted with everything we still refused to name. The nursery was quiet. Rows of potted plants lined neatly along the gravel paths. Soft music playing somewhere distant enough not to interrupt the hush of the place. We walked side by side, close enough that our arms could have brushed if I let them. I didn't. Not quite. But my body leaned toward him, even as my mind tried to stay still. He pointed out small fixtures for the garden, lights that might cast soft glows along the path. Details I barely heard. My attention was split, half on the words, half on the pull between our bodies. Each pause in the conversation felt heavy with the things we weren't saying. By the time we returned home, my hands were trembling again. I told myself it was the heat, the long afternoon. But I knew better. Later that night, after the dinner dishes had been cleared and the house settled into its familiar quiet, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window. The lights outside glowed softly against the dark. The garden bathed in the soft flicker of the fire pit he had lit earlier. He was still there, moving slowly, methodically, tending the last of the embers. His hands arranging the logs, the muscles of his back shifting beneath his shirt as he worked. He knelt to adjust something near the base of the fire, and I felt the breath catch in my throat. I stayed in the shadows of the room, watching him through the glass, one hand resting against the frame of the window, the other curled loosely around the stem of my glass. The wine untouched. I wanted to go to him, wanted to cross the space between us, to feel the heat of the fire against my skin, to reach out and let my hand rest against his shoulder, slide down the line of his arm, press my palm against the small of his back and stay there. But I didn't. I stayed in the dark, letting the want sit in my chest, heavy and sharp. letting it fill the space between my ribs, letting it remind me of the line I had not yet crossed but no longer knew how to walk away from. Tomorrow, I told myself. Tomorrow, maybe I'll find the right moment. Tomorrow, maybe I'll stop pretending I'm still trying to resist. But even as the thought passed through me, I knew it was a lie, because I wasn't waiting for the right moment. I was only waiting for him. It was my husband's idea. I should have expected it, the way he often filled the calendar with social gestures, weekend gatherings that stitched together the illusion of an idyllic, content life. A garden lunch, he said. Something simple, something nice. It's been too long since we had people over. He offered one morning over coffee, scrolling through his phone, eyes flicking between his inbox and me. Let's invite a few friends, your girlfriends, maybe some of the neighbors. We can make a day of it. He didn't wait for my agreement. Didn't notice the way my shoulders tensed, the quiet panic that stirred beneath my skin. He was already planning, listing names aloud, asking his son if he'd help with the setup. You're good at that sort of thing, he added with a smile, tapping the side of his cup. I couldn't object. There was no reasonable argument against it. And worse, it sounded so reasonable, so natural. The perfect suggestion, the perfect stage. I nodded, agreed to pick the menu, to arrange the flowers. I smiled the smile I had worn for years, the one that folded itself politely over discomfort, and I buried the dread that tightened my chest. It wasn't fear of the guests. It wasn't even fear of the day itself. It was fear of how much I already wanted the danger. The morning of the lunch arrived wrapped in clear blue skies, the sun soft but warm, the breeze light enough to stir the tablecloths, but not enough to cause trouble. Jazz played from the small speaker tucked near the back patio, drifting lazily through the open doors. The table was set beneath the shade of the old oak, flowers arranged carefully in vases along the center. Plates stacked neatly, wine bottles chilled, their labels damp with condensation. It was beautiful. Too beautiful. The kind of effortless scene people might envy. Perfect if you didn't know how tightly I was holding myself together. I stayed busy in the kitchen, arranging the last of the dishes, avoiding the garden as long as I could. But even from behind the glass, I could feel his presence. I could hear the ease in his voice, the soft rise of laughter as he charmed my husband's friends, the quiet confidence in the way he moved between conversations. Like he belonged there. Like nothing had changed. But I couldn't meet his eyes. Every time I felt his gaze brush over me, I looked away. Not because I didn't want to see him, but because I knew how obvious it would be if I did. I could feel the weight of it, the heat of it, every time he drifted near. It was worse than waiting. It was knowing. The first dangerous moment came in the most ordinary way. I slipped into the kitchen for more wine, my hands steady, my breath shallow. The house was quiet, the voices outside muffled by distance. And there he was, standing near the counter, turning a bottle slowly in his hands. I reached for the corkscrew at the same time he did. Our fingers collided, held a second too long. Neither of us moved. His eyes met mine, searching, heavy with the weight of everything we weren't saying. The sound of the party outside pressed in through the open window, the soft clink of glasses, the rise and fall of familiar laughter. It felt impossible standing there so close, the brush of his fingers against my skin sending a sharp current straight through me. He leaned in slightly, barely enough to close the space, his voice low. "You're doing this on purpose," he murmured, lips so close I could feel the breath of the words against my cheek. But before I could respond, before I could decide whether I would, the back door swung open. My husband stepped inside, smiling easily, oblivious. "Need help with that?" The moment snapped. We both stepped back, the space between us now too wide, too stiff. I forced a smile, steadying my hands, my pulse hammering against my ribs. "No, we're fine," I answered, my voice smoother than I felt. But my palms were damp. My heart refused to slow. I couldn't stop thinking about how close it had been. how easily we might have been caught, and how little that possibility frightened me. If anything, it only fed the fire. Throughout the afternoon, he continued the game, small comments tossed into the air between conversations. Jokes that sounded innocent enough to everyone else but landed too precisely for me to miss their meaning. A glance held a breath too long. A smile curved at the edge, meant only for me. He knew exactly what he was doing, and so did I, but neither of us stopped. By the time the sun began to fall behind the trees, the table had thinned out. Guests trickled away, offering hugs and handshakes, waving their goodbyes as the air cooled. My husband, half drunk on wine and exhaustion, collapsed onto the couch inside, television flickering in front of him, eyes closed before the first commercial break. I gathered plates slowly, stacking them, my hands careful, my mind restless. I carried them out toward the kitchen, the silence of the house settling around me like fog. And then he was there again. Quiet. Close. He reached for the glasses I was holding, his fingers brushing against mine, steadying the stack. I let him take them, our eyes locking as he moved to set them down on the counter. There was no pretense now, no awkwardness, only the heavy, undeniable pull between us, the tension so thick I could feel it tighten the air. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned against the counter, watching me, head tilted slightly to the side, his gaze hard and clear. "You know this isn't going to work," he said softly, almost a whisper. "Not like this." I stayed still, my throat too tight to answer. He stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. "Do you want me to leave? Is that what you want?" I couldn't bring myself to speak, couldn't bring myself to lie. Instead, I shook my head. Once. Slow. And in that single motion, I gave him every answer he needed. It had stopped being about chance long ago. There were no more accidents, no more coincidences that could be blamed. Whatever excuses I had once made for the stolen glances, the shared silences, the proximity between us, they had all worn thin, threadbare, incapable of holding back the truth of what was happening, or what had already happened. I no longer waited for him to find me. I waited for him. Period. I counted the moments until he entered a room, until his footsteps echoed down the hallway, until his voice drifted from the garden or the garage. I felt it in the way my body reacted before my mind could argue. The flutter beneath my ribs, the pulse that sped up against my will, the heat that rose along my skin the second I knew he was near. I didn't fight it anymore. I stopped pretending I didn't crave the electric tension between us, the slow build of something I could neither name nor control. There was my life, the familiar routine, the careful performance of being a wife, the meals cooked, the polite conversations, the goodnight kisses pressed dutifully to my husband's cheek. And then there was the other life, the one that throbbed beneath the surface of every moment, waiting to burst through the thin fabric of my restraint. Every encounter with him fed that second life. The briefest look across a shared space could leave me trembling. A hand placed too close on the table, the slow curve of his smile when he caught me watching him from the corner of my eye. There was no longer any real effort to hide it between us, not from each other. The game we had played at avoiding, at resisting, had long since dissolved. It was during one of those too close moments, a pause by the kitchen door as the house slept, our voices little more than breath between us, when he finally spoke the words we had both been circling. "I'm not going to stop," he said quietly, the certainty in his voice cutting clean through the hush of the room. "I don't want to stop, and neither do you." There was no accusation in it, no anger, just truth. Simple, steady. The admission didn't frighten me. I thought it might. I thought hearing it aloud would snap the spell, would send me running back into the safety of denial. But instead, I felt the opposite. Relief. As if a weight had been lifted from my chest, one I hadn't realized I was carrying. He didn't ask if I agreed. He didn't need to. The silence between us answered well enough. I found myself dressing differently again, but now I knew exactly why. It wasn't subconscious anymore. It was deliberate. The dresses that clung a little closer to my waist, the silk beneath the cotton, the lace that traced along my skin like a promise. I reached for the perfume I wore only on special occasions, pressing it softly along the hollow of my throat, the inside of my wrists. The earrings that caught the light just so, the thin gold chain that rested against my collarbone. There was no date set, no arrangement made. But I knew he would be there. Somewhere in the house, somewhere near enough to feel the pull between us tighten once more. And I wanted to be ready. Needed to be. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual that night, adjusting the curve of my necklace, smoothing the line of my dress, watching the way my reflection held my gaze, unflinching, as if daring me to call this anything other than what it was. This wasn't chance. This wasn't accident. This was my hand, reaching, my choice. I heard the sound of the door downstairs, the soft closing of it as he returned from wherever he had gone that afternoon. My pulse jumped before I could stop it. I pressed my hands against the cool surface of the vanity, steadying myself, breathing slow. And then the words came, unexpected, from the other side of the familiar life I had been holding on to. "We should go away for a few days," my husband said later that evening, his voice casual, as if he were suggesting nothing more than a trip to the store. "Visit my family. It's been too long. They keep asking when we'll come." I froze, felt the blood drain from my face before I could answer. "We could leave this weekend," he continued, not noticing the stiffness in my body. "It'll do us good. A change of scenery." I nodded. I had to nod. But my mind was spinning too fast to make sense of anything beyond the weight of those words. A few days away. Away from here. Away from him. And then, as if the knife hadn't gone deep enough, my husband smiled easily and added, "Maybe he should come too. He hasn't seen them in years." The panic rose so quickly it nearly stole my breath. I couldn't picture it. The three of us in a car together, polite smiles, small talk, all the while my body aching for the space between glances, the quiet moments when no one else was watching. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving, of breaking the thread that bound those moments together, of giving up even a single day of the fire that had taken hold inside me. The idea of him turning his attention elsewhere, even briefly, twisted something dark and desperate in my chest. Jealousy, sharp and raw, flared beneath my ribs. The fear of losing what hadn't even been mine to claim. I smiled back, agreed to the trip, said all the right things, but my mind screamed beneath the surface. I didn't want it to end. Not now, not ever. The drive was unbearable, not because of the length, not because of the company, but because of the space between us. We sat in the back seat together, my husband at the wheel, talking easily, narrating the passing landscapes, filling the silence with stories and plans and updates about the family we were going to visit. I nodded when appropriate, offered small comments, but my words felt as thin and useless as the air between us. Beside me, he was still. Too still. His arm resting casually along the door, his fingers drumming softly against his knee. His gaze out the window, controlled, detached. As if this drive was just a drive. As if we were just two people sharing the same ride and nothing more. But I knew better. I could feel the tension radiating off him like heat. Each breath he took seemed too deliberate, every movement measured as if to keep the shaking beneath his skin at bay. Our elbows nearly touched, just inches of space. But the ache of it was worse than any distance could have been. Every time the car hit a small bump in the road, every slight sway of the vehicle that shifted our bodies closer, I felt my heart jump. My hands clenched tightly in my lap, nails pressing into the soft flesh of my palm, a small, sharp reminder that I couldn't reach for him here. Not now. Not like this. I stared out the opposite window, jaw tight, counting every second. His silence didn't make it easier. If anything, The way he held himself together so perfectly, so calm, so composed, only made it worse. The restraint in his posture, the way he refused to look at me even once, was a language all its own. And I heard it louder than words. I wanted him to look. I wanted him to break. I wanted to see that same hunger written across his face that burned beneath my skin every minute we sat there. But he stayed still, focused, distant. My husband kept talking. Stories about his brother, about the last time they'd visited. Smiling easily in the rearview mirror, glancing back now and then as if to check whether we were still awake. He noticed nothing. He never did. The visit itself blurred past me. Conversations, polite laughter, meals shared over long tables while memories and small talk floated around the room. He played his part well. So did I. But the weight of what pressed beneath the surface didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier, more unbearable with every forced smile. Every moment we stood just a breath apart but couldn't touch. It wasn't until the drive home that I realized how much worse the waiting had made it. I could feel it in the way my pulse quickened as the familiar streets came back into view. The house rising ahead of us, calm, still, unsuspecting. My husband pulled into the driveway, sighing with the satisfaction of returning home, his mind already on the shower, the comfort of his favorite spot on the couch. He left his bags by the door, peeling off his jacket, calling over his shoulder that he was going to rinse off before dinner. I nodded, barely hearing him. My eyes were on the kitchen. I moved without thinking, feet carrying me into the room where I knew he would be. And he was there, waiting. There were no words between us. None needed. His back was to me as I stepped inside, but he turned the moment he felt me near, as if drawn by the same impossible pull I couldn't fight anymore. His eyes found mine. Heavy, dark, wide open with the thing we'd both been trying to hold back. I thought I was going to lose my mind, he said softly, his voice rough around the edges, just above a whisper. Being there, sitting next to you, acting like it was nothing. I couldn't answer. My body moved before my mouth could. I crossed the space between us and pressed myself into him, my hands gripping the front of his shirt, twisting the fabric as if that might hold me steady. His arms came around me, hard, pulling me closer, anchoring me against him as our foreheads touched, breath tangled between us. We didn't kiss. Not right away. We just stood there, bodies locked, trembling beneath the weight of how long we had waited, how close we had come to breaking. When his lips finally found my skin, they didn't rush. They pressed softly against the curve of my cheek, warm, deliberate, lingering. His hands cradled my face, thumbs grazing the edges of my jaw, steadying me as if he knew I might fall. The sound of water running upstairs reminded us where we were, who was just a floor above. But neither of us moved. Neither of us could. I felt his breath against my ear, felt the way his chest rose and fell too fast beneath my hands. I can't stop, he murmured. The words barely sound at all. I don't want to. And still, I said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. It was supposed to be enough. The quiet, the touch, the shared breath. But then the moment cracked wide open. A few days later, the neighbor's voice drifted across the garden fence while my husband was grilling dinner. Friendly, offhanded. "It's nice to see how well your wife gets along with your son," he said. "You know, I noticed them out here the other evening, talking by the fire. Looked like they were having a good time." My husband smiled, shrugged it off, tossed a joke about how lucky he was to have such harmony in the house. But the words lodged inside me like a stone, heavy, sharp. The risk was no longer theoretical. Someone had seen, someone outside of us. And yet, instead of fear, what rose inside me was something closer to thrill, to the sick, sweet heat of being close to discovery. The nearness of the fall only made me lean harder into the edge. That night, after the house had gone still again, I stood by the window with the lights off, watching the glow of the garden lights as they flickered against the dark. My husband had fallen asleep on the couch, head tilted back, mouth slightly open, soft snores breaking the quiet. His phone buzzed once on the coffee table, unanswered. I didn't look at him. I heard the soft creak of the bathroom door upstairs, the padding of bare feet against the wood floor, the rustle of a towel being adjusted. When I turned my head toward the hallway, he was there. Bare chest, damp skin, hair pushed back from his face, the towel low around his hips. His eyes found mine immediately. Neither of us moved. The house could have collapsed around us, and I wouldn't have looked away. In his eyes, there was no question, only waiting. I knew then that I wasn't going to stop. I wasn't even going to try. Because this was mine. This was what made me feel alive again, and I wasn't ready to give it back.